walked through the massive halls of the Galactic Council building. Her footsteps echoed on the smooth metal floor. Around her, beings from hundreds of different worlds moved with purpose. Some had 4 arms, others floated in the air, and a few looked like walking trees, but was used to this site after 30 years of working here. The council building was the size of a small city. It floated in space between 3 star systems. Representatives from 847 different species came here to make decisions that affected billions of lives across the galaxy, represented humanity in this vast organization. She stopped at a window that showed the endless stars outside. Earth was far away from here, but felt proud when she looked at those stars. Humans had made their mark on this galaxy, even if many other species did not notice. When humans first joined the Council 200 years ago, they were just another new species. The older races looked down on them. They were masters of mathematics and could solve problems that made human computers crash. There were warriors who had conquered dozens of worlds. They had built art and culture when humans were still living in caves. But humans had something different. They could talk to anyone. When they got into a fight over trade routes, humans found a way to make both sides happy. When they refused to share their technology with younger races, humans convinced them it was the right thing to do. Slowly, other species began to ask humans for help with their problems. Remembered her first day as an ambassador 25 years ago. Her boss, ambassador, had given her simple advice. "Listen more than you speak," he said. "Most species want to be heard before they want to be understood. Give them that and they will trust you." It worked. Spent years learning how different species thought and felt. The valued honor above all else. The Millennial Collective made decisions by group voting that could take months. They communicated through color patterns that humans could barely see. Learned to speak to each of them in ways they understood. Now she was the senior human ambassador. She had stopped 3 wars just by getting the right people to talk to each other. She had helped write trade agreements that made everyone rich instead of just a few powerful species. She had saved lives that most beings would never know about. But it was not just. Humans were everywhere in the council, doing jobs that others found boring or difficult. They fixed the communication networks that let species talk across the galaxy. They delivered supplies to planets hit by disasters. They stood between angry armies and helped them find peace instead of war. Captain Sarah ran the disaster relief program. When earthquakes hit the farming world of Prime, Sarah's teams were there in 2 days. They brought food, medicine, and temporary shelters. More importantly, they brought hope. Sarah spoke 17 different languages and could coordinate rescue teams from dozens of species who normally would not work together. Dr. managed the quantum communication relays. These machines let beings send messages across thousands of light years in just minutes. The technology was incredibly complex. Most species could use the relays, but only humans seemed able to keep them working properly. And his teams worked around the clock, making tiny adjustments that kept the galaxy connected. Commander Lisa Torres led the peacekeeping corps. When border disputes started heating up, her teams went to the problem areas. They did not carry heavy weapons or threaten anyone. Instead, they set up neutral meeting spaces and helped angry leaders find solutions. Lisa had personally prevented 47 conflicts from becoming wars. The strange thing was that most other species barely noticed this work. When the communication network worked perfectly, no one thought about the humans who fixed it every day. When disasters got handled quickly, other species assumed it always worked that way. When wars got prevented, no one celebrated the battles that never happened. Understood this. Humans had learned long ago that the best work was often invisible. On Earth, teachers shaped minds but rarely got famous. Farmers fed nations but stayed unknown. Engineers built bridges that everyone used but few remembered. It was the same here among the stars. The Council's High Commission met every week in a huge round chamber. sat with 14 other senior ambassadors from the most powerful species. Today they were discussing the budget for next year. As always, the conversation became heated. The conglomerate contributes 37% of the council's funding, announced Ambassador 9, his mechanical voice echoing in the chamber. We demand representation proportional to our contribution. Military strength matters more than money, growled General of the Empire. His species looked like giant bears with too many teeth. Our fleets protect council space. That should count for more. Wisdom cannot be measured in ships or credits, said Lady Ethereal of the. Her people glowed with soft light and claimed to be the oldest civilization in the galaxy. We have guided this council since its founding. Watch the three most powerful species argue like children. This happened every week. Each one wanted more control, more respect, more power. They never seemed to notice that while they argued, the real work got done by others. Perhaps we could focus on what the council actually accomplishes, suggested quietly. The quarterly reports show that disaster response times are down by 30%. Trade volume is up by 18%. Border conflicts are at a 50-year low. Maybe we should talk about how to keep that progress going. The three powerful ambassadors stopped arguing and looked at her. Could see them thinking the same thing they always thought. Humans were useful, yes, but they were not really important. They were tools to be used when convenient. Yes, very good work, Nine said dismissively. But we were discussing important matters of governance. Nodded and stayed quiet. She had learned when to speak and when to listen. But inside, she felt something she had never felt before in all her years at the council. She felt tired of being useful but not valued. Tired of doing important work that others saw as unimportant. Tired of keeping the peace between species that barely acknowledged her existence. After the meeting ended, walked back to her office. She had reports to read about new colony disputes and communication breakdowns in the Outer Rim. Important work that someone had to do. Work that humans always seem to end up doing. She did not know that this feeling of being taken for granted was about to become much worse. She did not know that in just a few weeks, the species she had spent her life serving would betray everything she believed in. And she definitely did not know that humanity's response would shake the galaxy to its core. The emergency session alarm echoed through the council building at 3 in the morning. Rushed from her quarters to the main chamber, still putting on her formal ambassador robes. Around her, representatives from dozens of species hurried through the corridors. Everyone looked worried. In the chamber, the massive display screens showed live footage from the sector. Felt her heart sink as she watched war fleets moving toward the peaceful colonies. The ships were huge and dark, bristling with weapons that could crack planets. Behind them came troop transports carrying millions of soldiers. There were philosophers and artists. Their colonies were beautiful places full of gardens, libraries, and music halls. They had no real military, just small patrol ships meant for rescue work. Had visited Prime once and remembered walking through crystal forests while gentle beings with 4 arms and large eyes showed her poetry written in light patterns. The fleet will reach the outer colonies in 6 days, announced Council Secretary. His species looked like living rocks and never showed emotion, but even he seemed shaken. Intelligence reports suggest this is a full conquest operation. Population estimates indicate 8 million civilians are in immediate danger. Studied the tactical display. The hegemony was a military empire that had been expanding aggressively for decades. They enslaved conquered populations and strip-mined entire worlds. If they took the colonies, it would be genocide. General of the stood up. They are outside council protection zones. This is not technically our concern. 8 million lives are always our concern, replied firmly. She activated her personal display and began pulling up data. I've been working on this situation for the past month as the moved forces into the region. I have a proposal. had indeed been preparing for this moment. She understood the better than most council members realized. They respected strength, but they also understood economics. Her plan was elegant in its simplicity. "We establish humanitarian corridors," she explained, highlighting areas on the star map. "Human peacekeeping ships create safe zones for civilian evacuation. Meanwhile, we offer the something they want more than the world's." "Which is what?" asked Lady Ethereal. "Mining rights in the Procyon Nebula. The nebula contains rare elements worth 100 times more than anything on the worlds. They are expanding because they need resources for their growing fleet. We give them better resources in exchange for leaving the alone." Had spent weeks putting this plan together. She had studied psychology, calculated the economic benefits, and identified exactly which nebula mining rights the Council could legally offer. It was the kind of careful, thorough work that humans were known for. "We've used this approach successfully with the before," continued. 3 years ago, they were threatening the shipping lanes. We offered them exclusive trading rights in the Vega system instead. No shots were fired and both sides benefited. We can do the same thing here." The chamber filled with murmurs of discussion. Saw many representatives nodding. The plan made sense. It saved lives, avoided war, and actually gave the something more valuable than conquest. "How quickly can we implement this?" asked Ambassador of the Tau Collective. "Human peacekeeping ships can be in position within 48 hours, replied. "I already have preliminary approval from Earth Command for the mission. We just need Council authorization." Felt confident. This was the kind of crisis that humans handled well. Complex problems that required patience, creativity, and the ability to see solutions that satisfied everyone. She had done this successfully dozens of times before. But then Ambassador 9 of the stood up. "This proposal is unacceptable." Felt surprised. The usually supported diplomatic solutions. "What concerns do you have, Ambassador? I can modify the plan to address any issues." "The concern is human overreach," 9 replied in his mechanical voice. "This proposal gives Earth military forces access to strategic sectors under the guise of humanitarian action. It grants humans unprecedented authority to negotiate with hostile powers. Essentially, it makes humanity the military and diplomatic leader of the Council." Stared at him. "That's not what this is about at all. We're talking about saving 8 million lives." "Are we?" General had stood up as well. "Or are we talking about human expansion disguised as peacekeeping? The situation is unfortunate, but Council intervention would set a dangerous precedent." "What precedent?" asked, genuinely confused. "The precedent of protecting innocent people from genocide." Lady Ethereal spoke next, her voice soft but cutting. "The precedent of using humanitarian crises to justify human military intervention. We have seen this pattern before from your species. On your own world, your nations used humanitarian justifications for countless military actions." Felt the room turning against her. These 3 species, were the most powerful members of the Council. If they opposed her proposal, it would fail. "This is completely different," argued. "We're not talking about conquest or regime change. We're talking about evacuation corridors and negotiated settlements. The same things we've done successfully many times before. Previous situations involved smaller conflicts with limited scope," 9 replied. "This proposal would establish humans as the Council's default military response to any crisis. That is unacceptable." Looked around the chamber. She could see other ambassadors watching the debate carefully. Many species that usually supported human proposals were staying quiet, waiting to see which way the political wind blew. "Then what do you propose we do?" asked. "Just let the slaughter 8 million innocent people." "We issue a formal protest," General said. "We impose economic sanctions. We work through proper diplomatic channels." "That will take months," protested. "They don't have months, they have days." Some situations cannot be solved quickly, Lady Ethereal observed. Perhaps they should have prepared better defenses instead of relying on council protection. Felt sick. She was watching 8 million people get abandoned because 3 powerful species were worried about human influence. It made no sense. Humans had never tried to take control of the council. They had always worked to support other species, not dominate them. The vote was called 2 hours later. Watched the display as the numbers came in. Her proposal failed 412 votes against, 213 votes in favor. The 3 most powerful species had pulled their allies into line, while humanity's friends were not enough to make a difference. As the session ended, sat in her chair feeling numb. Around her, ambassadors filed out of the chamber, returning to their normal business. Only a few stopped to offer sympathy for the failed proposal. "I am sorry," said Ambassador quietly. "Your plan was good. Politics is sometimes cruel." Nodded but said nothing. She was thinking about something else. During the debate, she had noticed something strange. The 3 opposition leaders had used almost identical arguments. Their speeches felt prepared, rehearsed. They had been ready for her proposal before she even made it. Over the next few days, did some quiet investigation. She reviewed communication logs, studied voting patterns, and talked to trusted friends in other delegations. What she discovered made her feel sick. The UN had been meeting secretly for weeks. They had known about the crisis long before it became public. Worse, they had been in contact with the hegemony, found evidence of private communications, negotiations, and under-the-table deals. The 3 species had promised that the council would not intervene in their conquest. In exchange, they had agreed to support these species in future council votes. It was a trade lives for political power. Sat in her office staring at the evidence. Her hands shook as she read through intercepted messages and decoded communications. The species she had trusted, the leaders she had worked with for decades, had betrayed everything the council stood for. On the 6th day after the vote, the first bombardments began. Watched the reports from her office, alone. Cities burned from orbit. Civilians fled in panic through crystal forests that were now exploding into deadly fragments. By the end of the week, it was over. They had taken all 7 colonies. 8 million gentle, artistic beings were dead or enslaved. The civilization, which had created beauty for thousands of years, had been destroyed in days. Submitted her resignation that evening. She had spent 30 years building trust between species, and that trust had been revealed as an illusion. The council she had served so faithfully had chosen political convenience over moral duty. She sent one message to Earth before she left her office for the last time. 7 words that would change the galaxy. "Pack your things. We're going home." Captain Sarah stood in her office packing the last of her personal belongings. 20 years of disaster relief work fit into 3 small boxes. Photos of rescue missions, awards from grateful worlds, and a small sculpture made by children whose lives she had saved during the earthquake crisis. Sarah's door chimed and her assistant, Lieutenant, entered. "Captain, the delegation is here again. They want to speak with you about the transition." "Tell them I've already provided all the documentation they need," Sarah replied without looking up from her packing. "Every protocol, every supply list, every contact for emergency response across 47 sectors. It's all in the system." They say the documentation isn't enough. They want hands-on training for their people. Sarah finally looked at her assistant. Both women understood what was really happening. The council species thought they could simply take over human operations with a few quick meetings. They had no idea how complex the work actually was. "The documentation is complete," Sarah said firmly. "If they can't understand it, that's their problem now." Across the galaxy, the same scene played out in thousands of locations. Human engineers, diplomats, peacekeepers, and administrators received message and began the quiet process of leaving. No protests, no angry speeches, no demands for justice. They simply packed their things and prepared to go home. Doctor had worked on the quantum communication relays for 15 years. The network was his life's work, a web of incredibly sophisticated machines that kept the galaxy connected. When he got's message, felt his heart break a little, but he also felt relieved. Called together his team of 43 human engineers. "We leave in 72 hours, he announced. "I want complete handover documentation for every relay station, every maintenance protocol, and every emergency procedure. Make it clear and simple." "Sir," asked engineer, "what about the cascade prevention algorithms? Those require constant adjustment based on solar wind patterns, quantum fluctuation data, and about 1,000 other variables. The documentation alone would fill a library." "Then we make a library," replied. "Every bit of knowledge we have goes into the handover files. After that, it's not our responsibility." The engineers worked around the clock for 3 days. They created detailed manuals, recorded video explanations, and documented every aspect of their work. When they finished, the handover package contained 2.3 million pages of technical data, 847 hours of instructional videos, and complete diagnostic records for every relay station in the network. Commander Lisa Torres faced a different challenge. Her peacekeeping corps was currently managing 17 active border disputes across the galaxy. Some of these situations were so delicate that the wrong word from a mediator could start a war. "We can't just abandon our posts," argued Lieutenant Colonel James Park. "There are lives at stake in the Rigel sector. If we leave now, the end will be shooting at each other within a week." "Then we make sure we leave them with the best possible chance for peace," Lisa replied. "Accelerated negotiations, emergency mediation sessions, whatever it takes to reach temporary agreements before we go." Lisa and her teams worked miracles in those 3 days. They pushed through compromises that normally would have taken months to negotiate. They established communication protocols between species that had barely been speaking to each other. They created frameworks for continued dialogue after human mediators were gone. In the Rigel sector, Lisa personally spent 18 hours straight in negotiations between the fish people and the crystal beings. The two species had been arguing over mining rights for 6 months. Lisa found a solution that gave both sides what they needed while protecting the disputed moon's unique ecosystem. "This agreement depends on continued good faith from both parties," Lisa explained as the documents were signed. "Without mediators present, you'll need to talk directly to each other when problems come up. Can you commit to that?" The representative's gills fluttered nervously. "We have never negotiated directly with crystal beings before. Their communication methods are so different from ours." "You've been learning to work together for months," Lisa reminded him. "You're more capable than you think. Trust yourselves and trust each other." Meanwhile, herself faced the most difficult conversations. Ambassadors from dozens of species came to her office, trying to understand what was happening. Many of these beings were genuine friends who had worked with humanity for decades. "This makes no sense," said Ambassador of the Tau Collective. His people had supported humanity's proposal and genuinely cared about justice. "You can't punish the entire council for the actions of 3 species." "We're not punishing anyone," replied calmly. "We're just going home." "But why? Your people do important work here. The galaxy needs human skills, human perspectives. Don't let politics destroy everything you've built." Looked at her old friend. Was a good person who meant well, but he didn't understand what had really happened with the crisis. He saw it as a political disagreement rather than a fundamental betrayal of trust. "Tell me, what do you think humans contribute to the council?" asked. "So many things. Diplomacy, engineering, peacekeeping, disaster relief. You solve problems that others can't solve." "And why do you think we're good at those jobs?" Considered the question. Your species has a unique combination of talents: empathy, persistence, creativity. You see solutions where others see only problems." "That's all true," agreed. "But there's something else. We do those jobs because we believe they matter, because we think protecting innocent lives is more important than political convenience, because we trust that when we work hard to help others, they will support us when we need support in return." "The Council does support humanity," protested. Pulled up a recording of the vote. 412 species voted to let 8 million innocent people die rather than let humans prevent a genocide. They didn't vote against our plan because it was bad. They voted against it because they were afraid of human influence. Watched the voting record in silence. Could see him thinking, perhaps for the first time really understanding what had happened. "The Council only supports humanity when it's convenient," continued. "When it costs nothing, when it doesn't threaten anyone's position, when we stay quiet and useful. The moment we try to use our position to save lives, we become a threat that must be stopped." "But surely we can work together to fix this," said desperately. "The Council can change. We can investigate what happened with the vote. We can hold the responsible parties accountable." Shook her head sadly. "The responsible parties are the three most powerful members of the Council. The investigation would be handled by Council committees controlled by those same species. Do you really think they would hold themselves accountable?" As the 3 days passed, the Council leadership tried different approaches to stop the human exodus. They offered increased representation for humanity in Council decisions. They suggested joint investigation committees to review the situation. They even hinted at economic incentives to keep human workers in their positions. All offers were politely declined. Human representatives finished their handover documentation, trained replacement staff as much as possible in the time available, and prepared to leave. They were professional and courteous throughout the process, which somehow made it more unsettling for the Council species. General tried to use military pressure. "Human ships cannot simply leave their patrol sectors without proper authorization," he announced. "The fleet will prevent any unauthorized departures." Commander Torres responded by having all human peacekeeping ships power down their weapons and request permission to return to Earth space through proper diplomatic channels. When they tried to block their departure, the human ships simply waited patiently in formation, completely passive but impossible to ignore. "You cannot arrest ships for wanting to go home," Torres pointed out to the Admiral. "Unless you're declaring war on Earth, you have no legal authority to detain us." The standoff lasted 6 hours before the back down. The sight of their massive warships surrounding peaceful human vessels made them look like bullies, which hurt their reputation among other Council species. Ambassador 9 tried a different approach with, "This emotional reaction is understandable but illogical," he said in his mechanical voice. "Galactic civilization is too important to be disrupted by temporary political disagreements." "This isn't temporary or political," replied. "This is about fundamental values. Your species helped arrange the murder of 8 million innocent people for political advantage. That's not a disagreement we can work through." The conglomerate was acting in the best interests of galactic stability, 9 insisted. "Sometimes difficult decisions must be made for the greater good." "The greater good doesn't require genocide," said, "and it certainly doesn't require lying to allies and betraying trust. You've shown us what the Council really values, and it isn't what we thought it was." On the final day, walked through the Council building one last time. The hallways that had felt like home for 30 years now felt like a foreign place. She passed the chamber where she had given her first speech as an ambassador. She stopped at the memorial wall honoring beings who had died in service to galactic peace, including 17 humans. Touched the nameplate for Ambassador, her old mentor who had taught her to listen before speaking. "I hope we're doing the right thing," she whispered. Then she walked to the docking bay where the last human transport was waiting. As the ship pulled away from the council station, watched through the viewport as the massive structure grew smaller and smaller. Behind them, they were leaving a galaxy that was about to discover just how much it had taken for granted. 3 weeks after the last human ship left council space, the first relay station went dark. Chief engineer of the conglomerate stared at his displays in confusion. Relay station Alpha 7 in the Deneb sector had simply stopped working. One moment it was processing thousands of quantum messages between star systems. The next moment it was broadcasting nothing but static. "Run full diagnostics," ordered his team. "This is impossible. These stations are designed to operate for centuries without maintenance." The diagnostic programs ran for 6 hours and found nothing wrong. According to every sensor and scanner, Relay Station Alpha 7 was functioning perfectly, yet no messages were getting through. Worse, the static seemed to be spreading to nearby stations in the network. Pulled up the human documentation that Doctor had left behind. The files were incredibly detailed, but they assumed knowledge that the engineers didn't have. References to cascade prevention protocols and quantum coherence adjustments filled page after page, but the actual procedures were buried in thousands of technical specifications. "Sir," reported his assistant, "we found something. The humans were making micro-adjustments to the quantum field generators every 3.7 hours. The documentation mentions it but doesn't explain why." "How micro?" asked. 0.0001% power fluctuations. Our instruments barely register changes that small. Felt a growing sense of dread. They were masters of mathematics and engineering, but they had always worked with precise, unchanging systems. The idea that something as complex as the Galactic Communication Network required constant tiny adjustments was alien to their way of thinking. By the end of the month, 47 relay stations had failed. The Galactic Communication Network was developing holes like a piece of rotting fabric. Some star systems found themselves completely cut off from the rest of civilization. The problems weren't limited to communications. Trade routes across the galaxy began experiencing massive delays and disruptions. They had assumed they could easily replace the human logistics systems with their superior mathematical models. Trade Minister 12 watched cargo ships pile up at the Vega Junction, one of the galaxy's busiest trade hubs. According to calculations, the junction should have been able to process twice as many ships as it normally handled. Instead, it was backed up for weeks. The human systems were inefficient, 12 insisted to his staff. "Our models prove that cargo can be routed more logically through standardized pathways." But the models didn't account for the thousands of variables that human logistics officers had handled automatically. Solar storm seasons that made certain routes dangerous for weeks at a time. Political tensions that required cargo ships to avoid specific systems. Equipment failures and crew rotations and local holidays, and a million other small factors that human planners had somehow kept track of. The human systems hadn't been inefficient, they had been adaptive. They learned and adjusted constantly based on real-world conditions rather than theoretical mathematics. Without that flexibility, trade ground to a halt. The worst crisis came in the cluster, where a plague outbreak threatened to spread across multiple star systems. The disease affected 17 different species and required a coordinated response involving medical teams, quarantine procedures, and supply distribution. Under human leadership, this kind of crisis would have been contained within days. Sarah's disaster relief teams were experts at coordinating between different species with different needs, different biologies, and different cultural approaches to medical treatment. They had volunteered to take over disaster response duties. Their ancient wisdom and artistic nature, they claimed, made them natural leaders in humanitarian crises. Lady Ethereal herself led the response team too. It was a disaster. They approached the plague outbreak like they approached everything else, with careful contemplation and elegant solutions. They spent 3 days studying the disease from an artistic perspective, looking for patterns and meaning in the way it spread. They wrote beautiful poetry about the suffering of the infected populations. They held meditation sessions to find spiritual solutions to biological problems. Meanwhile, the plague spread to 6 more worlds. They couldn't understand why other species were so impatient. Healing cannot be rushed, Lady Ethereal explained to desperate planetary governors. We must understand the deeper meaning of this crisis before we can truly address it. People are dying, responded Governor Marks of Prime. We need medical supplies and quarantine teams, not philosophy lectures. Your anger is understandable but counterproductive, Lady Ethereal replied calmly. Negative emotions only make healing more difficult. By the time practical medical teams finally arrived, the plague had spread to 17 star systems. 2 million beings died from a disease that could have been contained if the response had been faster and more practical. Border conflicts were escalating all across the galaxy. Without human mediators, disputes that should have been resolved in days were turning into months-long standoffs. The Conflict Resolution Corps, now staffed entirely by non-humans, discovered they lacked humanity's talent for finding common ground between completely alien mindsets. In the Rigel sector, the temporary agreement that Commander Tors had arranged between the and lasted exactly 5 weeks. Without human mediators to help them communicate, the 2 species fell back into their old patterns of mistrust and miscommunication. The conflict started over something tiny, a fishing boat in disputed waters. Under normal circumstances, a human mediator would have resolved it in an afternoon. Instead, it escalated into a military standoff that threatened to destabilize the entire sector. The new conflict resolution team was led by Ambassador of the Crystalline Assembly. His species approached disputes through pure logic, analyzing the legal and practical aspects of disagreements without considering emotional factors. The Fishing Rights Treaty clearly states that vessels must remain outside the 10-kilometer exclusion zone, explained to the delegation. Your vessel was 9.7 kilometers from the disputed moon. Therefore, you were in violation of the agreement. But the tidal patterns shifted, protested the captain. The same fishing ground that was legal yesterday is illegal today because of natural changes we can't control. The treaty does not account for tidal variations, replied. Legal documents must be precise and unchanging. If you wish to fish in tidal areas, you should have negotiated different terms. The delegation made clicking sounds that indicated extreme frustration. This is why we cannot work with soft bodies, their representative declared. They make agreements they cannot keep because they do not understand the stability of crystal law. What didn't understand was that Commander Tors had deliberately written the Fishing Rights Treaty with some flexibility built in. She knew that rigid rules would break down when they encountered complex real-world situations. The art of diplomacy wasn't about creating perfect legal documents. It was about creating frameworks that allowed different species to solve problems together. Without that human insight, the Rigel sector situation spiraled out of control. Within 2 months, both species had moved military fleets into the disputed area. Other systems watched nervously as what should have been a minor fishing dispute threatened to become the first major war in over a decade. Emergency sessions of the Council became daily occurrences as crisis after crisis overwhelmed the galactic government. Systems were failing faster than they could be fixed. Communication networks had more holes than coverage. Trade routes were clogged with confused cargo ships. Diseases spread unchecked. Wars threatened to break out in multiple sectors. Ambassador 9 stood before the High Commission trying to explain how their advanced civilization was falling apart. We are experiencing temporary technical difficulties, he announced. The conglomerate is deploying additional resources to resolve these issues. "Temporary," shouted Governor Vex of the Tau Collective. "My system hasn't been able to send or receive messages for 3 weeks. My people think the rest of the galaxy has forgotten they exist." "The communication network failures are being addressed," Nine insisted. "Our engineers are implementing solutions based on human documentation." "Your solutions aren't working," Governor Vex shot back. "Every time you fix one relay station, 2 more break down. It's like the whole network is falling apart." General tried to maintain order. "The military is prepared to provide security during this transition period. Our fleets can maintain peace while civilian systems are repaired." "Military solutions won't fix trade routes or communication networks," pointed out Ambassador Zilla of the Union. "We need the technical expertise that humans provided. Without it, our entire civilization is grinding to a halt." Lady Ethereal spoke in her usual serene voice. "Perhaps this crisis is an opportunity for growth. The galaxy became too dependent on one species. Now we must learn to be more self-sufficient." Self-sufficient. Governor Marks was still dealing with plague outbreaks in his sector. "My worlds are dying because your people spent 3 days writing poetry instead of distributing medical supplies. We don't need growth, we need competence." The arguments went in circles. Each species blamed others for the failures while defending their own contributions. None of them wanted to admit the obvious truth, that they had driven away the people who actually knew how to keep their civilization running. As the months passed, the situation grew worse. Star systems began forming their own small alliances, no longer trusting the Council to meet their basic needs. Trade networks reorganized around local suppliers rather than galactic distribution systems. Some worlds started developing their own communication systems rather than waiting for the quantum relays to be repaired. The galaxy was fragmenting, and the Council was powerless to stop it. The species that had once ruled hundreds of worlds found themselves unable to manage the basic infrastructure of modern civilization. In the depths of space, human long-range sensors watched the chaos from a distance. Now serving as Earth's Director of Galactic Relations, read the reports with sadness rather than satisfaction. "They're destroying everything we helped them build," she said to her assistant. "Should we offer to help?" the assistant asked. Looked at the casualty reports from the plague outbreaks, the economic data from the trade disruptions, and the intelligence briefings about potential wars. Then she thought about 8 million civilians who had died because the Council chose politics over principles. "No," she said quietly, "they made their choice. Now they have to live with the consequences." 1 year after humanity's withdrawal, Ambassador 9 stood alone in the Council chambers. The massive hall that once housed representatives from 847 species now echoed with emptiness. Only 200 species remained in what had been the galaxy's greatest alliance. The others had left gradually, quietly, without dramatic announcements. They simply stopped sending representatives to Council meetings. They formed smaller regional alliances that could actually provide the services their people needed. They gave up on the dream of galactic unity and focused on local solutions that worked. 9 reviewed the casualty reports on his personal display. The plague had killed 2.3 million beings before finally being contained. Border conflicts had escalated into 3 actual wars, with over 1 million military casualties. Trade disruptions had caused famines on 17 worlds. Communication breakdowns had led to diplomatic disasters across dozens of systems. The quantum relay network was now operating at 37% capacity. They had managed to keep some stations working, but they couldn't fix the problems as fast as new ones appeared. Most long-distance communication now went through slower, more expensive private networks. "Sir," his assistant's voice interrupted his thoughts. "The investigation committee has finished their report on the situation." 9 felt his mechanical systems performed the equivalent of a sigh. The investigation had been demanded by the smaller species still remaining in the council. They wanted to understand what had really happened during the crisis that started humanity's exodus. The investigation had taken 6 months, not because the truth was hard to find, but because the 3 most powerful council species had tried everything possible to stop it. They blocked access to communication records, classified documents as state secrets, and used every legal trick they could think of. But the truth eventually came out. Private messages between and leadership revealed the full scope of their conspiracy. They had known about the threat weeks before it became public. They had secretly negotiated with the to allow the conquest. They had coordinated their opposition to humanity's rescue plan. Most damning of all were messages discussing how to use the crisis to reduce human influence in the council. The 3 species had seen the genocide not as a tragedy to be prevented, but as an opportunity to put humans in their proper place. "What does the report conclude?" 9 asked, though he already knew the answer. "Complete betrayal of council principles," his assistant replied. "The committee recommends formal censure of all 3 species, removal from leadership positions, and reparations to surviving populations." 9 processed this information with the cold logic of his mechanical mind. The recommendations were meaningless. The conglomerate controlled 30% of the council's remaining budget. The empire provided most of its military protection. They held ancient treaties that gave them veto power over major decisions. The species that had destroyed the council were the same ones keeping it alive. They couldn't be punished without destroying what little remained of galactic government. "File the report," 9 instructed. "Schedule a response for next month's session." But even as he said it, 9 knew there would be no response. The 3 conspirator species would ignore the report, the smaller species would protest, and nothing would change. The council would continue its slow decline until it finally collapsed completely. A priority message appeared on his display. Emergency diplomatic communication from the Tau Collective. 9 opened it and felt something approaching emotion as he read. "The Tau Collective formally withdraws from the Galactic Council, effective immediately. We can no longer participate in an organization that prioritizes political convenience over moral responsibility. We will remember the species that chose power over principle." That made 47 species that had left in the past month alone. Soon only the 3 conspirators and their closest allies would remain, ruling over an empty empire of their own making. 9 walked to the observation windows that looked out into space. Somewhere in the darkness, human space remained closed to the galaxy. No communication, no trade, no diplomatic contact. It was as if humanity had simply erased itself from existence. But recent intelligence reports suggested something different. Long-range sensors had detected massive construction projects in human systems. Ships of unknown design had been spotted leaving Earth space, but not heading toward Council territory. They were going in the opposite direction, toward the galactic rim and the unexplored darkness beyond. Humanity had not given up on exploration and discovery. They had simply decided to do it without their former allies. The report that 9 found most disturbing came from a science station near the edge of known space. They had detected energy signatures consistent with large-scale terraforming operations in systems that had been empty just months before. Humans were building new colonies, new civilizations, new alliances with species the Council had never even discovered. While the Council species struggled to maintain what they had built together, humans were creating something entirely new. They were moving beyond the petty politics and power struggles that had consumed the old galaxy and pioneering fresh frontiers with beings who had not yet learned to take their contributions for granted. Governor Vex of the Tau Collective had sent one final message before his species left the Council. You taught us that reliability is not the same as weakness, and that quiet competence is rarer than loud ambition. The humans understood this. You did not. In his private office, General reviewed military reports that painted a grim picture of influence. Without human peacekeepers to prevent conflicts from escalating, the military found themselves constantly deployed to crisis zones. Their forces were stretched thin trying to maintain order in systems that had once been peaceful. The wars they were fighting were ugly, brutal affairs between species that had never learned to resolve disputes diplomatically. They had the strongest military in the galaxy, but even they couldn't be everywhere at once. For every conflict they stopped, two more erupted elsewhere. General had been a warrior all his life. He believed in the power of strength and the importance of military might. But the past year had taught him something he had never expected, that preventing wars was much more valuable than winning them. Human peacekeepers had made his job easier by ensuring he rarely had to fight at all. Now he was learning the difference between being feared and being respected. The military could force compliance through threat of violence, but they couldn't create the trust and cooperation that actually kept the peace. That required skills his people had never developed. Lady Ethereal sat in her meditation chamber surrounded by the artistic masterpieces her people had created over. Beautiful sculptures, haunting music, poetry that captured emotions no other species could understand. They were masters of culture and wisdom. But culture and wisdom, she had discovered, were not enough to run a civilization. They were precious and important, but they couldn't fix broken machines or prevent plagues or negotiate treaties between alien species who barely understood each other. Lady Ethereal had always believed that they were naturally suited to lead other species because of their long experience and deep insights. The past year had taught her that leadership required more than age and philosophy. It required the ability to solve practical problems and the willingness to do tedious work that no one else wanted to do. The humans had done that work quietly, without demanding recognition or power in return. They had been the galaxy's janitors, mechanics, and mediators, while they had focused on higher pursuits. Only now did Lady Ethereal understand how much civilization depended on people willing to do unglamorous but essential jobs. In the ruins of the council chambers, a small delegation from the survivors had come to speak about reparations. Only a few 100,000 remained alive, scattered across refugee camps on distant worlds. Their ancient civilization was gone forever, destroyed in a few days of orbital bombardment. The delegate, an elderly being whose forearms trembled with age and grief, spoke in the soft tones his people had always used. "We do not seek revenge," he said. "Revenge cannot bring back our dead or restore our worlds, but we would like to understand why 8 million innocents had to die for your political games." 9. General and Lady Ethereal sat in silence. None of them could provide an answer that would satisfy themselves. They had sacrificed millions of lives to prevent humanity from gaining influence, but in doing so they had lost everything they were trying to protect. "The humans offered to save us," they continued. "They asked for nothing in return except the right to help. You stopped them because you were afraid of human power. But what power did they actually want? The power to save lives, the power to keep the peace, the power to build rather than destroy." The situation was more complex than it appeared, Lady Ethereal replied weakly. "No," they said firmly. "It was very simple. You had to choose between doing the right thing and maintaining your political positions. You chose your positions. Our people paid the price. And now your galaxy is paying a different price." The delegate stood to leave. "We forgive you, because hatred only creates more suffering. But we will not forget what we learned about who you really are when you thought no one important was watching." As news of the Council's collapse spread across the galaxy, many species began to wonder what might have been different if they had supported humanity during the crisis. The vote had been close, 412 against, 213 in favor. If just 100 species had found the courage to stand up to the three powers, the outcome would have been different. But they had stayed silent, waiting to see which way the political wind would blow before committing themselves. In trying to avoid taking sides, they had chosen the wrong side by default. Now they were learning that some choices could not be undone. Some relationships once broken could not be repaired. Some species once lost would never return. Junior Analyst 7 of the Science Division sat in his laboratory studying long-range sensor data from the galactic rim. The readings were fascinating and terrifying at the same time. Human ships were exploring star systems that the Council had never even. They were making contact with new species and forming alliances with civilizations the galaxy had never known existed. In just 1 year, humanity had expanded their sphere of influence beyond anything they had achieved in 2 centuries of Council membership. Without the political restrictions and bureaucratic delays of galactic government, they were free to explore, discover, and build relationships at their own pace. 7 sensors detected energy signatures from 17 different unknown technologies. Humans were not just exploring new space. They were learning from new species, incorporating alien knowledge, and developing capabilities that the Council had never imagined. The most intriguing readings came from a system approximately 40,000 light-years from Earth. Massive construction projects, energy outputs consistent with industrial development on a planetary scale, and communication signals in languages that computer analysis could not decode. Humans had found new friends to work with, new problems to solve, new frontiers to explore. They had moved beyond the stagnant politics of the old galaxy and embraced the infinite possibilities of the unknown. 7 included all of this information in his report to the Council leadership. He knew they would read it with a mixture of fear and regret. Fear because humanity was becoming something powerful and unknown beyond their control. Regret because they had driven away the species that might have shared those discoveries with them. As 9 reviewed the final reports from his intelligence services, he calculated the true cost of the betrayal. 8 million innocent lives lost immediately. 2 billion additional casualties from the conflicts, plagues, and disasters that followed humanity's withdrawal. The collapse of galactic civilization and the fragmenting of hundreds of allied species. All to prevent humans from gaining influence that they had never actually sought. The irony was perfect in its tragedy. In their effort to keep humanity from becoming too powerful, the 3 conspirator species had driven them away entirely. Now humans were becoming more powerful than ever, but in a place where their former allies could no longer benefit from that power. 9's mechanical mind processed the logical conclusion with cold clarity. The conglomerate, empire, and had achieved exactly the opposite of what they intended. They had not reduced human influence. They had simply removed themselves from it. Somewhere among the distant stars, humanity was building the future. And for the first time in their long history, they were building it without having to convince anyone that their contributions mattered. The galaxy had learned too late that some species could not be replaced, some relationships could not be rebuilt, and some opportunities would never come again. In the empty council chambers, Ambassador 9 turned off the lights and walked away. Tomorrow, he would submit his resignation and return to space. There was nothing left to govern, no one left to represent, and no reason left to stay. The humans had withdrawn silently, leaving the Council to answer for its actions. And the answer, written in the collapse of civilization itself, was clear for anyone willing to see it. Some mistakes could never be forgiven, because they could never be forgotten.